just kind of predict based on what we see or guess based on what we see on the ground, and that's absolutely not enough. A very concrete example is the fact, of course, that a lot of content in recent times related to Palestine has been either shadow banned or they don't get the right kind of views. There's been censorship of channels. We saw how, for instance, RT was censored by YouTube. There's been a lot of instances of direct censorship as well. But equally important is, I think, the kind of suppression through the style of content, which means that certain kinds of content do not get more views on some of these social media platforms, right? So your content gets views only if it has the potential of virality, and virality is very much a part of how these social media functions. So even if your content is good, but it's not viral according to what the social media platforms decide, then your content is definitely not going to get the kind of views it describes. So basically, these big companies, that we call them tech companies, but they're actually media companies as well, they have defined the information environment we are all living in. So even if you're not watching news, we are nonetheless completely, even if you're watching other kinds of content, we're completely controlled by these social media companies. So in multiple ways, I think that there is definitely a way in which these algorithms work against progressive content, unless because we really don't follow the mainstream perspective.
So you're saying that there's a deliberate suppression of information from progressive Pan-African media, right? But I want to also find out from you, Prasad, what are some other structural constraints that have been put in place to ensure that our voices are not heard?
Right. So I mean, there are you can actually find a lot of things. I'll just concentrate on 4 or 5 issues. I think first, for instance, is the question of networks, right? So basically, if you look at media today, organizations like Reuters, AP, AFP, the so-called wire agencies, they are really the hub of most information in the world. And where are they based? They're based in the West, right? Now, if you add to it an organization like BBC, for instance, these combined together really control the entire information ecosystem. They're very closely associated with governments, politicians, with the ideology of the West itself, which means that the entire framing of Africa, of Latin America, of Asia is completely by these organizations. And these organizations have a long history. They're very closely associated, for instance, with the colonial past. They basically, they're closely associated with big business, which basically means that from that time onwards, that framing, those networks that have been constructed, really define how our countries, our regions are covered. Now, let's look at another aspect, say the question of expertise itself. Many of these organizations depend on think tanks, which are funded by the West, which are, or influenced by the West, Western governments, Western NGOs, Western big business, which means that the studies, the surveys, all of these are basically commissioned by them, right? Which means that when even our independent media, when it wants to go to experts to get information, we need to work a lot to build those kind of independent networks of experts. That's very important for us, progressive and independent media, because the other side already has decades of expertise, so-called expertise, of a lot of which is actually quite racist and colonial in its mindset. But a lot of these organizations basically are very much ready, USAID funded organizations, Ford Foundation funded organizations, and all of them have a very particular point of view on Africa, on Asia, and on Latin America. So for us, it's a big challenge trying to develop our own network of experts to counter this point of view, right? So that's one other point. Another third point could be the question of, say, how do you train progressive Pan-African journalists, for instance, right? Because so much of journalism school, so much of media training has become completely depoliticized. And when I say it has become depoliticized, what I mean is that it has kind of fallen victim to the logic of capitalism. It says that basically, as a journalist, you don't look too much into, you talk about the leaders, don't look too much into systems, don't look too much into structures, talk about he said, she said. We'll come to that maybe a bit later. But to train an entire generation of progressive journalists requires a lot of work, because so much of that has been completely taken away from our systems. And finally, I think it's very important to note, and this is connected to the first point, that in the 70s and the 60s and 70s, all the countries that were part of the non-aligned movement, they came together to form this pool of non-aligned media organizations, which meant media organizations in Asia and Africa and Latin America. They worked together to share news, to share training exercises, to share infrastructure, and they created a kind of common sense, right? Which means people who read it, read that news, developed an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial understanding of that world. That system is no longer there. All that has been broken up entirely, and now we have AP and Reuters and AFP which control their entire network. So for a new organization to come in, it needs to kind of recreate some of that common sense, so to speak, which is a very tough challenge, and that's where sometimes those costs become very big. It's difficult to train people, it's difficult to build those network of experts, it's difficult to compete with the range of what AP and Reuters and AFP kind of offer, right? So, and there's so much media concentration that's happening that these are all big challenges in some senses for progressive media organizations.
I know you've touched a little bit on funding, but let's go a tad deeper. What would it take primarily in terms of financing to run an independent media outlet?
Right. I mean, this is of course a very, very, very tough topic for all of us. All of us deal with it. All of us try to find answers constantly. We try, we make mistakes, etc., etc. All that is happening. But my learning after a few years of trying or thinking about all of this is basically that ultimately, for a lot of independent media organizations, the solution is to build communities. Right. It's not like the olden times when during the anti-colonial struggles, maybe you had one section of capitalists who had very similar aims as you in terms of certain progressive goals, right? They also wanted freedom for their own purposes. The left or progressive forces wanted freedom to bring justice to the people. So sometimes there was a possibility of certain alliances being struck. But this is no longer those kind of time, right? Because now capital, for instance, is very clear that it is using media only for its own goals, right? So, for independent media organizations, I think one of the few options we have right now is to go to our audiences. And to go to our audiences, it's not enough just to say that, we're doing good work, please give us money or please subscribe to us. That's not enough, right? Because people are also struggling. People also need to pay their bills. People have a lot of issues in terms of how their finances are structured. So what would induce them? Or why would they feel like they need to help a media organization? That can only happen if they feel that they are a part of that media organization, that they have something not only to gain in terms of information, but they have some kind of an emotional involvement. They have a stake in that media organization. And it's not, I think it's not enough just to have good articles.
Right.
It's not enough to have good videos.
Right.
It is how you approach your storytelling. It is how you approach your journalism. It is how you talk to your audiences. It is how you make them a part of your work. And I think ultimately that's probably the only long-term solution. That it's a very tough ask. I'm not going to lie about it.
Right.
It's easy in theory, like the way I'm describing it. It's easy, but to sustainably do it, it's a big challenge, and I think it's something we consistently need to work on. It also means that as journalists, we also need to shift some of our perspectives. We can't just feel that it's good enough for us to be storytellers. We also need to think more and more about how our audiences, the people who read or watch our stories and videos, how they are responding. We need to be able to talk to them, etc., etc., all that. Now, a lot of this work is happening in the capitalist media, unfortunately, because as usual, they have the resources to try to experiment much more on this. So we might often have to learn some of these lessons, but bring our own perspectives into it, bring our own viewpoint into it, so that we can be progressive, we can be radical, but still manage to build our audiences. And I genuinely think there is that space to build those audiences.
I want to ask you about donor fatigue. You've already established that it's not easy running an independent media outlet, and also you look at all the competitions that you come up against all these already established organizations with decades of experience and so-called, in quotes, expertise. But let's talk about donor fatigue. If I invest into a media organization, I expect to see some form of results. Do these algorithms also demotivate what you call investors or donors, if I should put it that way?
Yeah, I mean, see, like I said, that really depends on what you look at, as a donor. If, for instance, you're looking at a businessman or one single person or a group of companies as a donor, sometimes their expectation might be in terms of metrics, right? They want high numbers. And that's one way of looking at it. For instance, we know a lot of NGOs or media foundations who fund independent media organizations across the world, and one way they justify their funding is by talking, for instance, about metrics. And maybe that's one way of looking at it. It's fair enough, but I think it's equally important that as independent media organizations, if we are trying to approach audiences, right, so then it's a different model that we kind of have to propose, which is that sometimes you might seek funding for a specific kind of work, for a specific set of stories. Sometimes you might seek funding for a documentary. Sometimes you might seek funding for say certain kinds of expenses, right? So you need to maybe try breaking up your expenses instead of an umbrella kind of contribution. And like I said, you need to certain organizations, for instance, work in terms of making their having regular meetings with their subscribers, seeking their feedback in terms of what stories they would like. Those are all options. So I mean, I think there are ways to, but really, in some senses, I said it depends on how you define your donor. If you're looking at the big donors, most likely it boils down to the question of metrics in terms of these many views, these many likes, this kind of reach, etc., etc., which sometimes runs the risk of becoming a race to the bottom, because then you're just desperately trying to meet those numbers. But whereas I think if alongside that you can try to build communities, you can try to build audiences, there is a possibility that you can define how who your donor can be.
Right. I'm at a loss for words as to why African media journalists, I should put it that way, or if I should put it that way, African journalists or journalists who are leftist in terms of ideologies are seen as biased, but Western journalists are seen as objective. Why that disparity?
Right. I mean, what is an objective journalist according to this kind of framing, right? I mean, the standard definition is an objective journalist does not take sides. But let's look at, for instance, a good story. We've been talking a lot about the Sahelian region in recent times. If you look at the work of objective journalists across the West, whether it be the BBC, whether it be the Reuters, whether it be the AP, the AFP, all of them can talk about Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso through only two perspectives. One perspective is the fact that these are all dictators, and the second perspective is that there is just a lot of say violence by Islamist groups in these countries. So these are the two perspectives through which all articles, all journalistic coverage about these three countries takes place. Now, is that objective? I would say it's definitely not, because having, for instance, been to Niger, what I saw was that there is a mass, upsurge of public sentiment, a massive wave of patriotism, in Niger, following the coup that took place 2 years ago. Across the region, across the Sahel, people are calling it the second independence movement, the second moment of liberation. They're saying we have gone beyond flag independence. Now, how is there such a huge gap between these objective journalists and what all of us can see on the ground if we go there? And the answer to that basically is that these objective journalists are not objective at all, right?
Yeah.
Because what is this objectivity? Objectivity is it basically how you frame the story is what defines objectivity or not. Now, these objective journalists, basically what they usually do is that they will say that, okay, say this incident has happened, here are three voices. One might be a person on the street, one will be an expert, one will be a government official, right? Now, this really does not give you a sense of anything for that matter. All these three voices are there. Of course, the expert and the government official will get more, say, volume. Let's take, for instance, the protests in Kenya that have taken place, right? So you will have, what the government official said, you'll have two or three experts saying this has happened, that has happened, etc. Very little from voices on the ground. So a lot of this so-called objective journalism is basically framing the story in a very traditional way. And when you frame that story in a very traditional way, what you are pretending to ignore is this traditional way of looking at the world. And what is the traditional way of looking at the world? I can give you a few examples. One is that, say the fact that capitalism is good. That is the base for this objective journalism, right? All objective journalism from the West works on the principle that capitalism is inherently good. All objective journalism from the West works on the principle that protests are bad, right? So even when they're writing about protests, they'll always have this tone that, oh, this is a disruption. Oh, this is, violent. Oh, this is causing trouble, right? They'll never look at it from the perspective that protests are most often people expressing their most urgent desires, right? All objective journalism is premised on the understanding that, say, collective action by trade unions is bad because that's, again, disruptive. All this kind of objective journalism works on the idea that, politics is largely elections, right? But healthcare is not politics, education is not politics, the roads are not really political. All of that is for the experts, so to speak. So when you're talking about this so-called objective journalism, these are the frames under that objective journalism, and that is what we need to smash when we are working as when we are working as progressive journalists. We need to be able to say that, hey, your healthcare is political, your education is political, your economy is political. Protests are a good thing. Protests are people expressing their most urgent and important desires. You need to spend more, you need to get more voices on the ground and less press statements from the government. It matters less if you carry 3 paragraphs from the president and 1 or 2 sentences from the person on the ground. It should be the other way around, right?
Right.
The biggest PR agencies in the world are often governments and big corporates. But you don't need to do more propaganda or PR for them, right? Except if they're doing, countries which are fighting anti-imperialist struggles need that kind of PR because they or propaganda, or they kind of need that kind of exposure because their voices are being suppressed. But if you go to the West, the governments and big corporates have a free sway anyway. So when you're talking about these terms like objectivity and balance, in traditional journalism, especially in Western journalism, they are purely defined as a journalism which ignores a lot of the context. And I think as progressive journalists, as Pan-African journalists, our supreme duty is to the context. And because it is the context that can actually provide the truth, it is the context that can provide a journalism based on justice.
Right. Prasant, this will be my very last question on this subject matter. Oftentimes, journalists could be covering, there are journalists who cover urgent justice issues, and these journalists are referred to as, quote unquote, activist journalists. How do we fight this label? How do we fight this tag?
My take on that is that why bother even fighting that tag? Because who are we trying to convince, right? We're not trying to convince those accusing us of this or those who are putting that label on us, because they are doing it from a different perspective. I began by talking about the McBride report. One of the interesting things in the McBride report, in the preface, the chairman Sean McBride basically says that for the longest time people have always created this false comparison between freedom of expression, freedom of information, which is what we associate journalism with, right? People have always said that there is some kind of these two things don't go together. One is freedom of information and one is calling for justice. And they made that point very clear in that report, and to this day it continues that freedom of expression and freedom of information and calling for justice are basically complementary. There's no, you can't do justice to one without the other.
Yeah.
Calling for justice is an essential part of freedom of information, of freedom of expression, of journalism, right? And if you pretend that it's not, you're not, you're not fooling anybody here. So I think, I'm less inclined to respond to those labels and more inclined to work on the key things, some of the key things I told you about, which is that, we need to build that common sense. We need to build that understanding of the world, of media itself, so that people don't ask, people ask them the question that, hey, why aren't you talking about social justice, right? So rather than that should be our aim. It should be to empower people. It should be to work with the audience, so to speak. It should be to work with our readers. It should be to work with our viewers. So they ask those journalists the question that why aren't you talking about social justice? Why are your reports, so pro-government? Why aren't you asking the important questions? Why aren't you giving us the context? Right. So that, I think, is what our aim is, that to build those kind of audiences, because journalism has, it has an informational aspect, it has an educational aspect, it has an ideological aspect. All of this comes in journalism, right? It's nonsensical to pretend that it's not the case.
Right.
I'll be silly if I say that my duty is just to inform people of certain facts and nothing more. There's nothing called pure facts.
Yeah.
All facts have an ideology, right? So our job is to basically bring that context out. It is to expose those contradictions in the world today. People are angry, people are curious, people are unhappy. They're wondering, why is there so much inequality? Why is there so much hunger when there is enough food for everybody in this world? Why are climate disasters happening when we know how to try to adapt to it? We know how to try to control it to some, not control, I would say as much as adapt to it to some extent. Why, when there is so much money, can't basic steps be taken in terms of healthcare, in terms of education, in terms of vaccination? We saw how Africa lagged when it came to the COVID vaccines. So people are angry, people are asking these questions, and it's our job, I think, to expose those contradictions, to show why these kind of situations and contexts exist in the world. So we need to engage with people on these questions. We need to build networks of people who are working like us, of experts, of our readers, of our viewers. We need to build these kind of networks, and we need to keep calling for justice, so that this question that we often talk about, the so-called activist journalists, that question becomes completely irrelevant.
Thank you very much, Prasant Radhakrishnan. We got in touch all the way from India. He is, like I earlier stated, he is a journalist of great renown. He's an independent journalist, formerly worked with the People's Dispatch. He also continues to work with a lot of media organizations here in Africa. We go for a short breather. Once we return, there's more on Progressive World. Do stay. Welcome back. Many thanks to Prasant for that insight, but there's still a lot more to this conversation about progressive Pan-African media and some of the things that have stymied or blocked the efforts of progress. I've been joined in the studios by Mr. Fanuel Ayaoli, and he is an education policy analyst. He's also a member of the Social Justice Movement, Ghana. Many thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Right. Let's explore other parts of this conversation as far as progressive Pan-African media is concerned. And this time around, I want us to look at the narrative power and misinformation. There's a lot of misinformation that Western media channels, out or churns out. I want to find out from you, how do you respond when Western media frames a conflict, election, or crisis before local voices are even heard in the first place?
Thank you very much. It is it has become the norm for the Western media to frame African narratives in unpalatable ways. And usually this happens because many platforms through which these informations are spread across are not owned primarily by the Africans. So by the time the information comes out, we the African finds it difficult to, as it were, comment on it on time. And most at times too, the Eurocentric or the Western media tries to establish some kind of moral narratives that has nothing to do with the underlayered or the realities in which African events comes from. They look through, or they give, they narrate Africans' experience through their Western lenses, rather than considering
the
Africans' lens, the situation, the events, how we are, how it defines us, how we feel it should be. They forget to look at all those kind of things. The best way we can respond, as you suggested, is by telling our story comparatively or critically. We should look for our own stories and narrate it as it is to fit our own context.
Is that the way we can beat misinformation? Because we do not control the pipeline. A lot of these Western media, they have a bigger budget. They are well traveled in terms of information. I mean, everybody or most people would want to tune into the BBC, the CNN, and co. But however, how do we beat these people in terms of misinformation? How do we purge it?
Yes, that's not a big deal. Though they own the bigger media platform that you've mentioned, but there is always a way to navigate through this. So I am of the view that the best way we can organize and beat the Western media to stop fueling or spreading misinformation about Africa, first of all, is by mass mobilization, networking. What do I mean by that? I can say that for now, the young African youth are doing very much for themselves. I mean the youth. They are using all sort of social media, for example, WhatsApp. So if we mobilize through networking using strategic media platforms, we will be able to propagate the correct and desirable information about Africa to the world. WhatsApp groups, Facebook, we can use Instagram and many other social media platforms that are available to tell our own story in our own fashion.
I had an earlier conversation with Prasant where he spoke about these, social media platforms, and the fact that even for these platforms that we are talking about, the algorithms do not work in the favor of progressive Pan-African media, because sometimes there's a deliberate suppression of information from these, media outlets. But I want to again find out from you, what other tools or strategies can we employ as progressive Pan-African media to compete with these Western media, especially considering also the fact that we are on a tight budget. We do not have the funds like these Western media have.
Yes, that's very true once again. But the good thing is, we are lucky that we had people who face more fiercely challenges when it comes to battling Western media. Notable figure like Amilcar Cabral has shown us the way in which we should be able to organize in face of challenges, whether we are on tight budget or what story. And for me, the best way we can do this is to go back to Amilcar Cabral, where he centered his arguments on community organization. So as I've already stated earlier, we need to tell our stories. And the best way to tell our story is to go back to our communities. We should organize. Whilst we are organizing over there, we will tell our true identity, I mean, our culture, our stories, our food. We project ourselves. By so doing, we will be able to regroup across the continents of Africa and beyond. So, in short, what we need to do in the face of the low budget, as we are talking about, and the algorithm and also all those kind of things, the best thing we can do now is to do grassroots mobilization. We should mobilize the grassroots. Community engagement. We build community, our stories, what is known as, what we call it, indigenous knowledge. We go back to our ancestors, the stories that were told, where we came from. From there, we will know where we are heading towards to. So basically, we need to regroup, grassroots mobilization.
Is it already happening?
Yes,
these
it is
Pan-African
happening.
collaborations already happening?
Yes, it is happening in many places, both within the continent Africa and outside continental Africa. For example, I'm from Social Justice Movement Ghana. We mobilize in order to represent the voiceless in society, to champion social and economic justice for all. There are others which Comrade Pratt, Kwesi Pratt, is also heading. What's the name?
The Socialist Movement of Ghana.
Socialist Movement of Ghana. And there are many others like this, both home and abroad, who are working closely in order to retell the good news about Africa, which the world is yet to know.
Do you think that journalism should be neutral, or you think that once justice is at stake, as a journalist, as a reporter, as a media organization, you need to take sides?
Well, it will be fatalistic for journalism as it is in our country, Ghana, to be neutral. Very fatalistic. It will not help. It will not help in the sense that you can say Ghana is overwhelmed with inequality. There is a huge gap between the rich and the poor, East Legon and Choco. Then between Flagstaff House, how do you call it? I prefer to call it Flagstaff House. How do they call it? The seat of the president, Jubilee House. Now look at this. Between Jubilee House and 37 Hospital, there is a notable edifice or structure over there. There is a school. Compare this. You see that the school is deplorable. Meanwhile, the hospital is well furnished. The seat of the president is well furnished, but the school that sits between these two is deplorable. That represents the inequality I am talking about. So in this case, journalism can never be neutral. Rather, I prefer journalism in Ghana should be constructive, partial. It should be what I would refer to constructive partiality. In other words, journalism in Ghana should tend towards justice, communal well-being of the people, rather than supporting the ruling class. I don't see journalism currently in Ghana in that phase where it is supporting the truth, justice, and supporting the voiceless. But rather, it seems as if journalism currently, not all, but most of the media houses seems to entrench the power that is being perpetrated by the ruling class.
What gives you hope about progressive or African-led media? Are you hopeful that there's a time to come where progressive African-led media would be on top, where our narrative is what is projected rather than the Western narrative, which is replete with lots of misinformation?
Yes, I think we are already there. The journey has already started. For example, what Pan-African TV is doing, the program you and I, we are on right here, it is a better standing ground to challenge the Western media narratives that are not in favor of Africa. We can further go ahead by establishing our own community radio stations, televisions, groups, including drama clubs and so on and so forth, to tell our story. By so doing, as time evolves, Africans will get to know their true history, and if we are able to know our true history and culture, we will be able to spread it and share it very well. Why it looked like for some time now the media narratives keep dominating is because for a long time Africans' knowledge has been shut down by this Western media. But thankfully we have a media house like Pan-African TV, which is projecting the image of Africa both within and without Africa. So definitely there is a hope for African journalism in propagating everything about Africa.
And this will be my final question. If you had the power to change the media ecosystem, what would be the first thing that you would change if you had full control?
Yes, this is a tough one. But first of all, what I would like to change is to empower all the media houses to generate Ghanaian knowledge, indigenous knowledge. And journalists should be trained very well in order to understand the dynamics, the nuances of Ghanaian situation, Ghanaian reality. That is the only way they will be able to project African narrative. We need to train journalists through African lenses. Most often, or what we have currently now, you can see that most journalists are being trained through the lenses of European media. For example, every young journalist from Ghana would like to be on BBC or speak like how other Western media, project themselves. It is time that we train our own journalists in our own way to understand African knowledge, indigenous knowledge. That is the only way they will be able to project it in our own form to fit our situation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fanuel Yaoli. He is an education policy analyst and also a member of the social justice movement. Lots of insights that we have got there. But there's still so much more to come here on Progressive World. Do stay. Right, coming up next, we are looking at censorship and state pressure. We will also be looking at digital colonialism. And to help me have this conversation, I've been joined by the National Youth Organizer of the Socialist Movement of Ghana, Nengi Obo Baden. Nengi, many thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Right. I want to find out from you, have you experienced the state pressure or surveillance for your work and how it has affected your editorial choices?
Well, I would like to thank you and say hello to your church viewers. I believe this discussion is going to be within the framework of media, but also because I'm an activist, I would love to dovetail it into activism.
Activism, right.
The issue about censorship is across board. And I must say that when I used to work, or when I was working with Pan-Africa TV directly, there were moments where our media outlets were shut down. I mean, on the social media platforms, they were shut down and all that. I believe it's part of the censorship. There are things you say, there are sounds you use that multinational corporations feel that they are entitled to those songs and those lines and all that. So they red flag your publications or your streaming. And I believe it's part of the censorship. But I must say that this discussion should explain what we are facing, the challenge we are facing as a activist and all that. First of all, we are in a class society, and identifying that there is a struggle or there is a class war is important. And looking at the media in terms of its class position is also important. Today, we know the BBC and the other CNN and other media outlets that we know have taken a class position. They are on the right, the far right. They are being funded and all that by the far right. And therefore, all the narratives they give are narratives that are not in support of the ordinary people and the masses of the world. And in that turn, anything that you do or anything that you say or any media outlet that tries to project anything on the left or which is led by us, they come at you in so many forms. Blocking your media platforms, taking you to court, instigating law actions against you and all that. So these are some of the things we are facing. And if you ask me if I face it directly, when I was working with the social media team of Pan-Africa Television, we were experiencing it a lot. And as an activist, as I speak to you, I've been off social media or Facebook in particular for almost 6 months.
Why is that?
What was my crime? My only crime was that I don't even know it. I was just sent a message that you are going against community standards. I've gone against community standards.
I see that sometimes.
And then they cited this particular page. They cited this particular page. They said, I was the one managing the Cuban Solidarity Campaign social media page or Facebook page. And that's the page they cited. But they were not specific on what I've said or I've done to breach community standards. And for 6 months now, I've been going back and forth with me
trying to retrieve
trying to find out because this account has been in existence since 2009.
Oh wow!
And they never brought it down. But when I became very active in activism in terms of supporting the ordinary masses of the world, they come at me.
How much of Western media's activities are supported by the states, by some states, and also local media? It appears that a lot of them are protected by countries, not just what we see on social media, but the countries themselves.
My brother, once again, I would like to dwell on the fact that capitalism works like a Medusic structure. It has a lot of heads, and all the heads have ways of biting. Medusa structure, and that is the structure they operate. So they found ways to tie their tails to some of the local media houses, some of the local media outlets in order to propagate or extend their hegemony. And that is what they have done in the past. They do this through so many means. They have ways of making sure that appointments are received by people who work in media houses so that there is that link between them and the media houses. They have ways of using NGOs and multinational corporations to go and carry out seminars and forums to push a certain narrative, which is in the interest of the far right. These are all ways they work. There are ways where they've instigated or they've put together a legal framework to guide certain media corporations. So, for instance, if you go to the US, there is the Fifth Amendment, which is supposed to protect media freedoms. But it's the same Fifth Amendment that this CNN and these big multinational media houses used to safeguard themselves when they go against the people and they don't want to account. They tell you that we activate the Fifth Amendment and they stay away from explaining where they get their positions from. And if you look carefully at what has happened in the past 5 months or so, or let's say 3 years, from the Russian-Ukraine war right to what is happening in Palestine and what is happening in Iran, or what happened in Iran, you get to know that the narrative has been channeled in such a way that it is right bias, it is capitalist bias, and it is just there to perpetuate the hegemony. Even in our local parlance, the news outlets are not challenging the real information that the masses ought to know. They take their information from this big media outlet and they churn it out, so our local people get to hear that instead of knowing the reality and the actual stance.
Is that what you would call digital colonialism? I was coming to that actually. Digital colonialism is broad if I look at it, because digital colonialism deals with the classical term colonialism is a people coming into your area to dominate, and through the domination extracting your resources and revenues. But digital colonialism is a new form or a new wave of colonialism where, because young people in Africa, people around the world are hooked up into the internet and are very attached to the internet is now used to regulate and also to find ways to extract revenue. This is how it operates. The data that we give to this media outlet, for instance, if you are opening a social media account like Facebook, you are asked questions, your name, your data, what you like, what you don't like, and all these things are captured into the database of Silicon Valley and all that, and they sell it to companies to use for advertisement. So their algorithms are written in such a way that they are always, sometimes you read something on Google that, oh, you are looking for a certain medication. The next moment when you're on Facebook, yes, there is an advert from that about that medication to you. These are all algorithms that they are. Sometimes you just even say it in a conversation. So and then what they do is that even our phones, when our phones go off, there are batteries in the phone that is active that picks some of the conversations we have. That is why if you go for intelligence meetings and all that, sometimes often they tell you to leave your phone outside, because even when the phone is inside and it's off, there is a way they extract information from you and they sell those information, and by so doing track you, follow you, and all that, and that is how the media colonialism is, or the colonialism of the media is being propagated or is being worked on. But are we truly independent if all our platforms, hosting and tools are all owned by Silicon Valley? How is that independence? We are not independent, especially for the working masses of the world and the progressives around the world. You cannot be independent. The only thing is you must be careful, because whatever step you take, they tell you that there is a third layer to protect your data and all that. All those things are false. They are fallacies. They've been done to make sure that you buy into a certain narrative that, oh, you are protected, so that you give out information freely. When you give out information, as and when they want to use it, they'll come against you with it. And that is how it's been. These global right-wing corporations that come together to push this media colonialism, what they do is that they thrive on information. So they give you a caveat that makes you feel free to share information, and when you share the information, they use it against you. What I think the progressives and the left of the world should do is we must read the content of their. You are going to open a social media page, and the TNCs, terms and conditions that they provide to you, it's like a magazine, a 10-page magazine. How will you read it?
everything, understand it before you open. These are all ways that they use it. So maybe we should go ahead. Even though I don't believe in the state, we should test the law. We should go to the law court and tell them that they should summarize some of these things, make it point blank, so that when you open, you know that when I do this, it's wrong. When I do this, this is how they are going to use against me and all that. And when it becomes like that, then you as a citizen or as an ordinary person will get to take a decision or make a decision as to how to use the media or where to use the media. But until that is done, we are not free.
Do you see any progress? Are you hopeful that there'll come a time where progressive Pan-African media becomes the order of the day, where misinformation from these state-sponsored, Western media, of course, you've already stated that they are far-right media organizations. Are you very hopeful that a time will come where that would not be the order of the day, but rather the African narrative, African progressive media?
Technology and the 21st industrial revolution comes with, or the 5th industrial revolution comes with its own challenges. But I must say that it is also opening up a new age of media engagement. For instance, if you look at what happened during the conflict between Iran and Israel, whilst the far right media houses were channeling out falsehood, I should call them, there were people on the ground who were also giving out their narratives, and people were buying into those narratives. If you look at TikTok, there were a lot of information. Now, for instance, Trump had come out to admit that Israel was really hit, but hitherto, during the conflict, they were of the view that it is Iran that is being hit. It is Iran that is being destroyed. But now, Trump himself has admitted it, that Israel was really hit. And me, I was listening to people who were on the ground, people who were taking live videos and all that. So I was clear in my mind that Israel was being hit. But why should the narrative be wrong? Why should they hide the truth and all that? And I believe that these media houses, even though they work in the interest of these multinational companies, people are beginning to be awakened. If you look at what is happening with the Palestinian struggle, nobody believed. I believe that whether Palestine is taken or not, Palestine has won the war. Because if you look at the support they have garnered around the world, it should tell you what the alternative media has been able to do. What we need to do as progressives is to identify these people who are into these alternative media presentations and give them the ideological background. They should know where they stand in the class struggle or the media class struggle, so that when they speak, they will be authoritative enough and they will know where they stand. Some of them just give the narrative without the ideological perspective. But ideology is important. As Kamal said that the state is actually a committee that is set up to manage the affairs of its own people. So they will always not be in our stead or in our support. What we have to do is to build a mechanism where all ordinary people on social media can speak for themselves and can speak for the working masses of the world.
Right, thank you very much.
I'm still coming.
Nenyi Bobaden is the National Youth Organizer of the Socialist Movement of Ghana. Very interesting conversation we've had on this evening's edition of Progressive World. I'm sure you've picked a thing or two, as I have. Would continue to project the African narrative and would continue to hope fervently that the African narrative supersedes or comes first before any other narrative, and would continue to ensure that would project Pan-African progressive media. My name is Koku Alomaso. This has been Progressive World, ideas for impact, a world in motion. Good evening.
Truly African.
I'm traveling to a place